Class 4. Thanks for being here. So we are going to continue our journey through the fundamentals and basics of 3D and Maya. And so today we're actually going to start talking about some things, actually some things that are quite overlooked, and they're actually really, really important. And so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my project is set to the correct project that I want, as you always should do, the first thing you should do. And mine is right there. Click set. And then I'm going to start by opening the example file. I'll just hit Control O. And then I'm going to start by opening the example file for rotation order sample. Okay, so rotation orders. So I'd like to talk about the concept of the rotation order first. So whenever something is created in 3D, it has something that's called a rotation order. And what that rotation order is, pretty much is a hierarchy of rotations. And so you can find the rotation order that the object is in by selecting the selecting the object. You should be able to go into the attribute editor, and you'll see the rotation order right here, X, Y, and Z. Now this is a little bit deceiving only because X is actually the channel that is independent of itself and is a child of Y, and Y is a child of Z. And so to further demonstrate my point, I created this little example, just 3 rings, and I've nested them accordingly to how you would kind of perceive the way that they would work. So let me open my outliner, and you guys can see I have the ring right here, and the only channel that I have unlocked right here is Z. And so with this object having the default rotation order of X, Y, and Z, Z being the channel that will bring all the other channels with it. And I'll explain what I mean. So using my manipulator, I'll only rotate it in Z. And this is just for example's sake. So when I rotate it in Z, all the channels go with it. And then you'll see down here that my next channel is Y. And if I rotate in Y, Z stays independent of itself, but Y brings X along with it. And so going even further down, the last channel is X. And so you'll notice that, let's say that I am rotating an arm, for an example, right? And you'll notice that I can get into a bit of trouble as soon as I get into the point where two of these channels begin to overlap each other. So let's say I have this rotated at 90 degrees. You can see now that my X and my Z do the same thing. And so when this happens, really funny things will start to happen, and you'll be able to tell immediately when you run into something called gimbal lock. This is what you call gimbal lock, when two of your channels are basically have the same purpose. They've been transformed so that they overlap each other. And then so to demonstrate my point, I should note though that a rotation order can change. And sometimes you would want a different rotation order based off of what limb you're interacting with. But rotation orders are set up for a character. Rotation orders are set up during the rigging process, and that's something that's established by your rigger. If there's something that you want specifically, maybe the ability to change it, because there's that kind of functionality in rigs sometimes, or maybe you want a specific rotation order, it'd be good to communicate that to them while they're creating the rig for the character. So I'm going to use this as an example. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, you know what? Let's make a new one. Okay, we'll start with the box, just like we always do. And you'll see that while I'm rotating, right now, I'm rotating in gimbal space. These are the different spaces that we talked about last week, and I'm rotating in gimbal space. And what that does is, it does exactly what I was showing you guys with these rings, right? So this rotation order, if we check really quickly, the rotation order for this is X, Y, Z. Z being the most dominant channel, meaning that if I rotate in Z, it'll bring everything with it. If I rotate in Y, it'll only bring X. If I rotate in X, it won't bring any of the other two with it. And so where the problem begins to happen is that most of the time when you interact with your controllers, you'll most likely be either in object space, since that's what makes the most sense intuitively, or maybe world space, just because whatever you're dealing with or the rotation that you want is aligned to the world space, and that's the easiest way to get what you want. The problem is that, let's say, for example, this is a forum, and for example's sake, I'm gonna get into my sub-object mode. I'm gonna take this face, I'm gonna pull this face out like this. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna set a key here. Oh, actually, first, I'm gonna go into gimbal, and then I'm gonna put myself in gimbal lock intentionally. And so you'll see that if I rotate in Y 90 degrees, X and Z are now overlapping each other. If I middle mouse X right here, it does the same thing as Z. And so for an example, this is the weirdness, the kind of weirdness that you can run into when this happens. So if I have my object, and I'm going to be rotating in object mode now. In object mode, we're all good. Nothing is, nothing's messed up, and no one's the wiser. So if I put a key here by hitting S, and I'll put a key here at 24 by hitting S also, and I'm going to be rotating up this way. Actually, to further demonstrate my point, sorry, I think I may have jumped the gun while doing this. I'm going to pull this one out. So I'm going to rotate in Z. Let me check my gimbal real quick. Yep, I'm going to rotate in Z this way. Now you'll notice that when I was in gimbal, there was no channel or no manipulator that would let me rotate in this direction. But when I was in object mode, or even world mode, right, that channel is there. So what happens is when I set a key and I rotate it in a direction that there is no channel, and in other words, it's in gimbal lock, whoa, this stuff starts to happen. So it doesn't react, or it doesn't interpolate the way you would expect it to. So that's something to be very, very aware of. There are a couple of ways to fix this, and we'll go over how to fix it once we start getting more into the animation aspects of all this, and once we start diving further into how to use the graph editor and all that stuff. But this is a principle that's really, really important, and it's often, very, very often overlooked. The argument can be made that, if it's only for a short amount of frames, maybe you can just key every frame. But the problem then there is that if you're working on a production that interpolates between those frames, meaning between 1 and 2, because there are frames there, we just don't see them, then you might get weird things in motion blur, or you might get weird things in gameplay. If it's for a game, and once you put it into an engine, it'll kind of stretch those frames out in a sense and still interpolate between those two. So it's really important to be aware of that. Cool. Okay, so now I would like to go over a breakdown of the 3D pipeline. So this has nothing to do with any, I should say, we're not going to be doing actually anything in Maya. This is something I want to explain to you guys real quick. So for the context of, or I guess for example's sake, I'm going to be describing this to you guys from the aspect of maybe a movie, right? A 3D movie. And so you guys may have seen this image before. It goes over the 3D pipeline, right? This is by Andrew Bean in the book 3D Animation Essentials. And so you can see here that pre-production starts here with an idea, then it goes to story, tons and tons of storyboards in order to get it feeling right, the animatic design, and then that was all pre-production. Once it enters production, it'll enter layout, R&D, modeling, texturing, rigging, animation. This is where we are. VFX, lighting, and rendering. And then it goes through a whole other phase of post-production, compositing, VFX, motion graphics, color correction, and of course, the final output of the film for our example's sake, right? And so the best way that I can describe the production aspect, since we are learning to be animators, the best way that I found to describe this whole production process to people that are, let's say, not of our world, not cut from our cloth, and maybe not familiar with anything. And this is actually a great way to explain it to new animators who may not be aware that there was a production phase, and they may not be aware that there were all these steps that happened before it got into animation, right? So here's how I always explain it to people. That way it's just the most digestible. So pre-production would be, if I compare it to the creation of a car, right? And so in this instance, it's the Batman tumbler. And so pre-production would do something like this, right? They would design the car, they'd provide turnarounds for the car, all the details, the way it would look, and all that. And then once we get into production, the first step is modeling. The modeling is the process of creating the 3D model, right? And then from modeling, it'd go to texture and shading. It would go through unwrapping and texturing and shading and all that other stuff that we were talking about last week. And, you know, especially the differences between shading and texturing. Then it would go to rigging. So this is a pretty ambiguous or vague concept for a lot of people that don't know about 3D, but rigging can be thought of, in this context, can be thought of the engine inside the car. In our case, for the characters, it's the skeleton and it's what we interact with the controls and the way it's set up and all that. But for simplicity's sake, you know, the rigging can be thought of as the engine and the steering wheel of the car, right? And then the next phase is where we come in. We are the ones that drive the car. We are these very cool and ridiculous versions of Batman driving the Batmobile. Obviously the most fun. And so that's just a very, very simple way of looking at things, just in case you're unaware of, you know, what each department does before us, before animation. Okay, cool. And so now we're going to get into some customization stuff. So I want to start talking about the shelf a little bit more. The shelf will most likely be one of the most useful things that you can use outside of Animbot, probably. You know, if I didn't have Animbot, I'd be using the shelf a lot more. But I wanted to go over customizing your own shelf in case there are commands that you do over and over again, and you don't have to dig through all of these menus just to find it, right? So first things first is there is a custom shelf in the tabs of shelves that you normally get, right? The default tabs, and you'll have this custom tab right here that you can add tools to, and you can see that I've already added a few here. And just for this example, I'm going to go ahead and delete these. And I'm just right-clicking this and deleting them. You can interact with the buttons this way just by right-clicking and deleting them. But you know, there are these tabs up here that you can switch the shelves, you know, from. But adding tools to the shelf is actually pretty easy. So let's say for example, you want to use freeze transformations and you use it a lot. So the way to add to the shelf is Control, Shift, left click, and you'll see that it added to the shelf that I have active. And actually, I will show you an example. So I made my box, right? And in order to freeze, let's say I want my 0 point to be right here. So freeze transformations is right there. I'll move it again, freeze transformations right there. And let me see here. Yep, okay. By default, a good shortcut or a good, you know, a good quality of life tool to use is the shortcut G. G actually, what that does is it repeats the last command that was executed. And so let's say if I move my box here and I freeze transforms, if I move my box again, I just hit G, it'll execute freeze transforms again because that was the last command that was executed. And so I want to go over a little bit into how you can edit your tools. If you go to this gear right here, you can add your own shelf if you want, and you can navigate from the shelves here, or you can obviously just click on the tab that you want. But let's go into the shelf editor. Oh, it should be noted, by the way, before I get into the shelf editor, if you make changes to your shelf and you want it to be saved for the next session, you're going to need to save your shelf like that. under this gear icon at the bottom, save all shelves. So let's go into the shelf editor, and I have my custom shelf activated, or I guess highlighted, and you can see this pane on the left shows all the shelves, and this pane on the right shows all the buttons inside that shelf. I have my freeze transformations here, and if I want to alter the icon that's up here in the shelf, I can do so right here. I can load my own graphic for the icon that I'm using if I want. I can change the color of the type if I want. I can change the color of the background if I so wish, and so on and so forth, right? Custom color, the transparency, whether the command is repeatable or not. This is an important one because if you have a script that maybe that you only need to run once, and if you run it again, you might lose a lot of settings. You might want to uncheck this. That way, once you run it once during a Maya session, you won't be able to run it again by accident and lose a bunch of the settings that you had. But for freeze transformations, I'm definitely going to leave that repeatable. Okay, so the next thing I want to go over that will actually lend itself to the shelf is the script editor. And so the script editor can be found under Window, General Editors, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, script editor. Here we go. Cool. So if you guys have done any kind of coding or anything like that, this is very, very similar to any listener or console or anything like that. So the purpose of the script editor is it shows you what's going on under the hood in Maya. And this is actually a great way to create your own custom scripts where if you find yourself doing an action over and over and over again, or like a set of actions over and over and over again, which is essentially like a function, then what you can do is you can hard code it. Hard code it being you can find out what the commands are being executed. You can copy and paste those over and over again, and you can make your life easier if it's just a matter of doing the same thing but to a different object. All you would essentially have to do is just change the name and execute the script again. And I'll see if I can demo something like that. I didn't quite prepare an example, but let's see what happens. Okay, so this is the console up here, and this is the editor. And so there are buttons up here that allow you to, this eraser button, you can, actually up here, you can open things, or you can run things, you can save, or you can, I believe might be save to shelf, yeah. Up here, you can actually clear these, so it's a little bit easier. This top eraser button will clear the console. This eraser button for the box down here will clear the editor. This will clear both. And so what I want to do now is actually, I would like to add one of these to the shelf. So let's say that I want to create this. And when I created that sphere, you can see that all of these commands were executed. But sometimes, if I go under history and I have this off, echo all commands, it'll give me a very condensed, almost like a summary of what's happening. And so let me clear this again, and I'm going to make a sphere. And you'll see that there are a lot less commands that happened when I created the sphere as opposed to when I echoed the commands. And so you can see here that these are the two commands that were executed to create the sphere, and this was the result of the sphere. So ideally, let's see what happens. So if I put this down here into my Mel tab, Mel stands for it's basically the scripting language that Maya uses. It uses two languages, Mel, which is only in Maya, and Python. And you can create your own tab just by hitting this plus icon, and you can change it. Oh, there we go. You can change it or choose which one you want depending on what kind of script you're executing. So everything up here is normally in Mel. And I'm going to delete this. Let's see what happens if I highlight all this and I hit return. It creates a sphere. And so let's say I wanted to do this over and over and over again for some reason. Actually, one more thing that I want to see. Okay, cool. All right. So if I copy this 3 times and execute, 1, 2, 3, gives me 3 spheres. And so you can see how this could be a really powerful tool in that maybe, you know, you need to go through and do a lot of similar, a similar library or a similar, you know, chain of commands just to different objects. You would essentially just change the name of the object. You would do it to one, copy those commands, and just change the name, and you'd be able to do that to all of them. And hopefully I'll be able to find a demonstration for that after the lesson. Right now, I just want to go over really quickly the concept of the script editor and all that. And so along those lines, let's say that I wanted to put one of these onto my shelf. What I can do is we can use this tool here, and then we can enter the name, let's say sphere, and it'll make me a sphere. Or what we can also do is if we highlight this and middle mouse drag, we just drag it to the shelf, and it'll give us an empty button right here, and then we'll have to edit this ourselves. Let's say icon label sphere. There we go. And if we need to reorder these for some reason, you know, you can just middle mouse drag and you can reorder them that way. Okay, cool. So that pretty much covers the script editor. You'll notice with a lot of the custom scripts that you might install, you'll have to go into the script editor, or you might have to go into the command line down here and execute a script in order to call it up. And you'll notice right here, it's in Python. You can change it just by clicking left click from Mel. Okay, so let's go over now the hotkey editor, one of my favorite things, and it should be one of all animators and all my users' favorite things. Okay, so if we go to Windows and we go to Settings, sorry, and the hotkey editor. Sorry, I might be loading up some of my shortcuts that I'm not using. Okay, here we go. So by default, we have the hotkey set to the Maya default. I have mine here, but I'm going to stay in default just so that I can explain to you guys a little bit better about all this stuff. And so there are different ways of finding a command to set a hotkey for, right? You can see down here, you can search by the application command. So if I were to look for freeze transformations, just like I was doing, I can just type freeze, and you'll see here that in this menu, right, it's in modify, which is the drop down right here, in freeze transformations, I can set a hotkey for that. And let's just say I want to set it to Control F. You'll see that if this pops up, then it's going to tell you that this shortcut is already assigned to something else. So let's say I want to assign it to Shift F. Shift F, it's frame. Okay, that's fine. And I'll save it. So that's the way you can, or that's one way of finding the commands that you're looking for. Another way is to look for the runtime command. This is a little bit, this one's a little bit overcomplicated. It's actually going to look for what's been returned in the console in the script editor. And most of the time, all of the tools or everything that you'll be wanting to interact with or you'll be wanting to use, you can either find through the application command or you can find it backwards through the hotkey. So if I hit F, right, if you hit F in the viewport, it'll frame your selection. And so it'll give you all the different commands that are bound to F in each different window. So if you're in the UV editor and you hit F, it's going to frame selected. If you hit F in the outliner, it's going to reveal whatever you have selected, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so if you have all of your Maya hotkeys set up, right, and let's say you're bringing it to work or you're bringing it to a new job with you, you see this gear right here, you'll be able to export your hotkeys. You can duplicate them, rename them, you can import new ones. You can even delete ones in case for some reason you have multiple instances of the same ones. That way it doesn't confuse Maya or anything. And let's see, I wanted to go over a little bit about these items right here. So in this dropdown, it's going to show you, sorry, I'm just going to make sure that's going to bug me. Sorry. this menu will pretty much show you where all the commands are if you want to look for it manually, if you don't want to use it by search. Just like we were looking for freeze transforms. If we go to menu items, we can see under here and modify and freeze transformations is right here. There are editors, and you can select like a graph editor, or you can select the outliner and change the hotkeys for that, if you so wish. One of the ones that you might find yourself adjusting a lot is probably the hotkeys inside the graph editor. And you have custom scripts and you have other items. So I want to go over custom scripts a little bit. So when you have a custom script and you want to make a new hotkey for it, let's say you don't want to assign it to a shelf, or you don't want to have to enter it in the command line every time, and you want to bind it to a hotkey. What you can do is right here, this tab right here called the Runtime Command Editor, you can create a new one just right here. And by hitting new, you have to name it, let's say, I don't know, new script. And the description is what's going to be returned down here in the help line. We put it under custom scripts and a subcategory if we so wish. And we put the lines of code that were executed, or the line of code that you need to bring up your script. I currently don't have one as an example, but I mean, we can just save it and we have it here. And we can bind it to a hotkey just right here. What's not being used? I think everything in Maya is being used. Anyway, if we wanted to bind it to a hotkey, we could. So I'm not going to save that. And that is pretty much the hotkey editor. Now, I want to show you guys, if you download custom scripts, and let's say that you want to install them, most of the time, scripts these days are very, very easy in that you can either just file, import, and you can navigate to the script that you downloaded, or you can just drag it and drop it into the viewport and it'll work for you. But if it's one of those older scripts that you need to install it a little bit manually, what you're going to have to do actually is you're probably going to have to drag the script into your Maya folder in your documents. So right here, I have my documents and in Maya, and I have scripts here. So you'll most likely have to put it in the version of Maya you're using. What we're using right now is 2018. And if we put it in scripts, we put it in here. You'll drag it into here. That way, whenever you run the command, it knows to pull the script from this folder. And when I say command, let's say, for example, give me 1 second. I'm going to look for a script that I have installed. And I'm going to grab the command line for it. Okay, let's see if this works. Let's see. Oh, I should also say that the shortcut for the script editor is actually right here in the bottom right. There it is. Okay, here we go. Cool. So this is a tool called, this is an old tool from a long time ago. It's called Comet, or it was from a group of tools called Comet, but this one's called Comet Rename. And the way to call the script is by typing Comet Rename, and you type these brackets and you type the semicolon to execute the function. And so if I hit that, it'll give me Comet Rename. I can do that, or I can bring this up here as a mail button. That way, whenever I want to use a script, I can do it here. Or if I go into my hotkey editor, I can create a new one named Comet Rename, and I bet you it's going to get mad at me for having a space here, actually. And then I will type that there and save the runtime command. And I'll go into my custom scripts, and you'll see the script right here, Comet Rename. So I'll put that under Control R. Or actually, do I have? Do I have everything? Okay, Shift R, sure. Now, when I just hit, I'm going to delete that. It's going to bug me. Whenever I hit Shift R, it'll execute that command and it'll give me my script. It'll know to pull the script from that folder. Okay, cool. Now, we're going to go over some rig stuff. We're finally going to start getting into rigs. Albeit, the first rig that we're going to start with is actually a simple rig. So what we're going to do is we are going to go into here, go into rigs, and we will open the ball rig. Ta-da! So here we have a very, very simple ball rig. Yeah, man, when I started, it was just a ball. I didn't even have a rig. Okay, so basically when you open up a rig, you're probably going to see three main components, right? And the components that we already spoke of prior. You're going to see a bunch of these controls. You're going to see the mesh, which is probably locked for some reason, which is a good idea. Let me open up my outliner. You're going to see the mesh. And the other thing that you might see, this one does not have it, which is probably good, but you might see the joints. I'm going to dig here just so that we can't see it. Oh, hang on. Nope, not there. Okay, well, so the joints are in here. This is not something we touch. We do not want to touch any of this. Hence the name, do not touch. Okay, so I just want to let you know that it's there. Okay, so the rig, as we were saying, is basically the system of controls that allow us to interact with the rig. And you can see that I've deselected everything else in my selection filter to just select curves. That way, when I'm interacting with my rig, no matter what, I'll only select the curves. I won't select the geometry by accident. And so the functionality of these things differ, right? And it'll pretty much tell you what you can and can't do based off of the channels that you see. So you'll see here, this is probably squash and stretch, and I'm guessing twist, actually. Yeah, I think you might be able to see it if we put wireframe on shaded. Yep, so there's a little bit of twist, although with this kind of a texture, you can't really see, so I don't know what the point of that is. For this one, this is meant to be just a rotate. For this one, we have our translates and our rotates. And then this is what I was talking about before with the idea of null nodes. So we have both of these controllers, right? You can translate and you can rotate. Come on, there you go. You can translate and you can rotate, but you can also translate and rotate with this as well. And so, and oftentimes it's a very smart thing to separate your animation by the type of channels or the type of the type of keys that you want. So let's say I'm only having my translation on this guy, and I'm only having my rotation on this guy. Just for an example, that's a very smart way to organize your animation. And now I want to go over something that's a little bit more on the rigging side. And this is just so that you guys get an understanding of what's happening under the hood. So that in case there's a problem with your rig and you need to communicate that to somebody, you guys are at least a little bit knowledgeable of what's going on or what might be happening. That way you can communicate it effectively. And so and actually, you know what? I'm going to do what they're telling me not to do. I am going to go in here and try and find a way to display the joints. Okay, so I bet you it's in the drawing override. There it is. Ta-da! Okay, cool. And draw style of a bone. You have to do this individually. Draw style of a bone. Oh, okay, pretty good. Only 3 joints. Okay, so here are our joints, the things that we're not supposed to touch, but we're touching them. Ooh. Okay, sorry. All right. I want to go over skin modifiers. Oh, actually, I think the same thing is happening with the geometry. So I bet you that this is on a drawing override as well, if I'm not mistaken. It is. Let's turn that off, and we can now select it. So now you might encounter a rig like this. If you open it up, you can see the joints, you can see the geometry, you can see the controls. And when you select things like this, and you hit a keyframe, you hit the button to keyframe. I will not do that because that is dangerous. You only want to set keys on the controls. You do not want to key the mesh. You do not, definitely not want to key the joints. This is why they put this there, because animators are very good at breaking things. And so when they tell you to not touch, do not touch. They mean it. Okay, so I want to go over the relationship between geometry and a joint. So these right here, underneath the channel box, these inputs and outputs are under the shapes. And so you'll see, actually under the inputs, you'll see a channel, or I guess, an item for a skin cluster. This means that whenever you select the geometry with a skin cluster, it basically lets you know that it is skinned to a joint. And so what I mean by skin to a joint is that whenever you move these joints, the joints have an area of influence around the mesh, right? So let's take a look at this, for example. I'm going to select only the controls. I'm going to select this squash and stretch control up here. You can see that when I move my control, it's moving a specific joint. So when joints are skinned to a mesh, it means that there's a weight to all of these points. All of these points have a different weight to them. Meaning, let's say if these vertices are weighted to this joint, then when this joint moves, these vertices will move. And if these vertices are weighted to this joint, when this joint moves, those vertices will move. But they don't have to necessarily be either 1 or 0. They can be a blend of both, So these vertices are probably weighted maybe 50% to this or 50% to this, or somewhere around, somewhere along those lines, only because you can see that the area of influence of this joint in particular, you can see that there's barely any influence down here, and there's a lot of influence up here. And so the only time meshes are skinned to joints is when the mesh needs to deform. And I'll give you an example with my arm. So let's say, for example, let me get the camera right. Okay, let's say, for example, that from my shoulder down to my wrist is our 3D model. That's our geometry, right? And so in order to get this to deform, what I mean by deform is that we'll probably have a joint running here and a joint running here. That way, when we go like this, or if we rotate the joint up, this mesh will deform. It will change shape, right? So when they talk about deformations and when they talk about skinning, that's what they're talking about. And so now, I want to talk about the relationship between the joints and the controllers. And you might have guessed it, we are going to go over constraints. So the way that this joint moves with, or let's say, let's find a more clear example. This might be a little tough, only because this one only has 3 joints. And it looks like they're connected. Okay, here we go. The way this joint is connected to, I'm guessing it's this control. Yep. The way this joint is connected to this control is through constraint. You'll see here in the channel box that if it's blue, that means it's bound by constraint, or it's attached to a constraint. And you'll see down here that it'll show you actually what kind of constraint it is. you can see at the very end it says orient constraint, and at the very end of these channels, it'll tell you what it's orient constrained to. And this is the weight. If you want to turn it off or on, again, we should not be touching this. This is just for example's sake. This is the object that it's constrained to, right? And so you'll notice that if we try and rotate this, right, we'll get it, but you'll see once we move the control, it'll snap back to normal. It won't contain, or it won't take any of the rotational value that you give it. Now, never do this unless you know what you're doing, but never do this. You see how these are blue? I'm going to key these exactly the way you're not supposed to. And they turn green, right? The reason behind that is when you make a keyframe, these channels turn what color? They turn red. And so if you mix red and blue, they make green. Green normally means good. In this instance, it means bad. So if you have a constraint or a something with a constraint on it and it has green channels, that is bad. It should not have keys over a constraint. There are very rare circumstances that you would need to do that. And I can only imagine it being like a one-time thing, but that's not a common practice. Okay, so to go over this a little bit more, I'm going to pull up another example. And we're going to get into constraints a little bit more. So we're going to create, we're going to open, where is it? Rig, ball rig, no. Maybe it's in samples. Yep, ARM example. Cool. So I've set up a sample scene for you guys to kind of play with. We've got an arm. And where are my joints? Oh, here. At the very end, you'll see X-ray joints. And so you'll notice that I can select the joints here. If I rotate it, this is the deformation. When a mesh needs to deform, when a mesh needs to change shape, it is skin. And you can see that when I select my mesh, oh, walk tool. When have I ever used that? When I have my mesh, I have my skin cluster right here. So I want to go over the type of constraints first. And so to follow along with this example, you guys have this in your class files if you want to do this. If you don't, it's totally cool. This is just so you guys understand a little bit better the concept of constraints, because I guarantee you, you'll need to use a constraint sometime in your career. I guarantee it. So what we're going to do first is actually we're going to create controls for this arm. We can do so just by going into curves, and we'll just create 2 of these. Let's create one, and let's create one and duplicate this. And so the way I'm going to align this is I'm going to do it the old school way, just for fun. So I'm going to shift select that and hit P for parent, and shift select this and hit P for parent. And then I'm going to zero these out. Ta-da! And now they are in the same place. But I don't want my controllers to be along this axis. I want them to be like this, which you would assume the way controllers normally are. So I'm going to rotate these by 90 degrees. And then now, problem is that I've got these nasty transformations that are already in there. And when I start animating this, I want these to be at 0. I don't want them to be at anything else. So what I can do, since they're still a parent of these joints, what I can do is I can do whatever I want to these. And then if I freeze my transforms, I'm going to use the button that I put here earlier. It'll still give me the correct orientation, but now I have a different graphical representation of the way the controller looks, but that's definitely not what I want. So at -90, I'll freeze transformations again, and it'll be at 0, but it'll still be intuitive for me to use. It basically runs along the line of the arm. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'll freeze transforms. And then what I'm going to do to contain these transforms, because you'll notice that once I bring it out of its group, I'll shift P just to unparent. you'll notice that I get all these nasty transformations back. So if I hit freeze transforms again, what it's going to do, it's going to default to the world space because it is a parent of the world space now. And that's not something I want. What I want is to be able to keep these. So the solution to that is, if you look here in my outliner, it is a parent of this arm. And this one is a parent of this, is a parent of this, and this is a parent of this. And so if I select these controls and I create a group by hitting Control G, this is what I was talking about a null node. The null node will keep your transformations in place because both of these are still children of this. So now when I select my group and I hit Shift P, the group is the one that gets all funky, but the thing underneath it stays at 0. That's basically how you create controls for rigs. You put null nodes above them. That way, whatever orientation you want them at, you can use just by using the null node, and then you can leave these at 0. And you can have as many of these as you want. You can create, it's not uncommon to have maybe like 3 or 4 null nodes for a controller. Let's say if there's a different parent space for, you know, maybe for the arm or for the wrist or anything like that. And so I'm going to do the same for this. I'm going to do the same thing for this, and I'm going to unparent. And the one thing that I did not do that I was really harping on you guys about earlier is naming these. So let's say lower arm control, right? And then rename this to upper arm control. And I'm going to do the same thing for the groups. I'm going to copy this, paste it, and then add _GRP. That way I know that what groups are there for. Now, now we're going to go over constraints. Oh, actually, before I do that, in case you guys are interested, or in case you guys want to, you know, are into creating some things for your own, if you select these curves and you hit Control A under the main tab, not the shape, but the main tab, you can go to Drawing Overrides and Enable Overrides, and you can change the color right here. So let's make these red. Sure, why not? Red. Cool. Oops. Oh, that was weird. Red. Yes. Nice, like that. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go over constraints a little bit more. If we go down into our rigging drop down, it'll give us our rigging menus, and we hit right here, we have a drop down for constraints. I'm going to detach this. That way we can kind of see what each constraint does. So what you want to select first is, in our instance, right, you want to select the master first, and then you always want to select what you're constraining second. So I want this to constrain this. And then let's say I'll hit parent constraint. A parent constraint works very much, or works exactly like the way it would if it were parented to it. You'll notice here that if I select this joint, all of these channels are constrained. All of the translates and all of the rotates. So I'm going to Control Z back. Actually, you know what? Instead, you can see that there's the item for the, or I guess the object for the constraint here in the outliner. And it's parented underneath this. So I'll select this and I'll delete it. You can delete constraints that way. And instead, this time, I'm going to do a point constraint. A point constraint will only constrain the translates. I'll Control Z back. Orient constraint will only constrain the rotations, like so. Ah, there's a problem there, and I would love to go over it. Great, okay, cool. And so on and so forth, right? The scale constraint only constrains the scale. The aim constraint's a little bit different. And so let's use these two, for example, because I don't think you would want to use an aim constraint with a joint necessarily, unless it's for the eyes or something else. Definitely not in a setup for the arm. So I'll select this control, and then I'll select this control, and I'll hit aim. So you'll notice that the rotations for this have been constrained to this. But what this does is, you guessed it, it's aiming at it. And it's going to stay aimed at it. So I'm going to control Z back. And then we'll get into, maybe we'll get into a pull vector. We'll see. That's for creating an IK arm. And so the way an FK arm, or the way like an arm like this is normally set up, is set up through a series of either parent constraints or orient constraints, depending on like the rig. But for our purposes, we're going to go for a orient constraint. Oops. See, that's what happened when you don't have your selection filters, selecting too many things. Okay, cool. So this will control this, which is what I want. But when I rotate this, this is left behind. So the solve for this is either one of two things, right? I can use this upper arm control and constrain the group above it, right? Or I can simply take this group that's above this lower arm group, take the group that's above the lower arm control, right? And middle mouse drag it up there. That way it's a child of this. That way I can use these like so. And that's pretty much constraints in a nutshell. And so, you know, the way these are set up, this hierarchy of controls, it'll really depend on the rig. Sometimes it'll be set up like this. Sometimes it'll be set up with using parent constraints. It really just depends. And so with that, actually, I'm going to delete the constraints. And if you are following along, let's go ahead and make another one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to unparent it by hitting Shift P. And then I'm going to rename this wrist control. And then I'm going to parent it to the wrist. You know what? I'll use the align tool this time. Why not? So I'll select both of these. Align objects. Oops, that totally didn't work the way I wanted to. Last selected object. Yeah. Awesome. Oh, I think I know why. Okay, never mind. I'm going to do it the old school way. Sorry. I messed up when I created this example. Okay. Cool. And then I'll create a group. I'll rename this wrist control group. Bring this out. Whoops. Bring this out. There we go. Cool. So now we have one for each, and I'll put that there. That way, whenever this moves, this moves. But then also, oh yes, okay. So actually, if you've been following along, what I want to do is I want to leave this as it is, and we're going to pull this example up again at a later date. So I'm going to save this out. And then if you are following along in the lessons, you can save over this as well. And we'll open this later once we get to, I guess, the next lesson where we'll be using this. Why is that on? Okay. And so the way to, I'm sorry, there's one thing that I overlooked. I'm going to hide those and then unhide this. I have a group up here with another arm with the same set of joints, but you'll notice that this is not skinned. And so there are a couple ways to actually skin this. So under rigging, under skin, I'm going to tear this off so it's a little bit easier. We're going to use this, this function or this tool here, not really a tool, but this command here called bind skin. And so the order you select it in is always the mesh first and the joints second. So by default, if you select the joints, it'll hit bind skin. It'll bind the entire skeleton, right? Or it should anyway. Okay, I know what happened. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, okay, cool. You know what? Let's Control Z back. Cool. All right. So let's do this. And let me see. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Let me troubleshoot this really quick. Join hierarchy, skin. There we go. Oops, don't select the mesh. Yep, okay, cool. All right. Actually, is that default now? That might be new for me. I learned it. It was not default. Sorry. I guess I'm old. Let's see. Reset settings. Joint hierarchy. It is default. Okay. I'm not crazy. Okay, here we go. So by default, the order that you want to select these in is always the mesh first and then the joints. And then if you hit bind skin, by default, it's going to bind all of these joints to the skin, meaning that each one of these joints is going to affect this mesh somehow, right? But there are certain joints that you actually don't want affecting it, much like these end joints right here. It's not very common practice to have these end joints take any weight. And so what you might want to do sometimes, in some instances where you only want certain joints bound to the skin, let's go ahead and Control Z back. You can select the mesh, and then you select the joints that you only want. Let's say just 1, 2, and 3. And if you go to the option box for bind skin, you'll see here that you can change it from joint hierarchy to only the selected joints. And there's a bunch of different methods here, or there's a bunch of different options here to kind of affect the way that it's bound to, or the mesh is bound to the skeleton. I won't go over this in too much detail, only because this starts to really get into rigging. But the thing I want you guys to take away from this more so than anything else is that you understand deformation. You will understand that there's a skin modifier every time something is, skin. And if you'll notice that maybe on a robot, if there's no skin modifier, then chances are the geometry is not, it's not bound to a joint. It's just parented or parent constrained. And that'll happen when you don't need pieces to deform. So let's say for a robot, let's say like this piece is a tube and this piece is a tube. These tubes, individual tubes, don't need to deform. They can keep their shape. But when you move them like this, they're still going to stay intact. There's no joint here for it, or there's no like skin or anything like there is on a human that needs to deform. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's hide this again. Let's unhide this. And let's save this out, and we're going to use this again at a later lesson. So I'm going to save. Cool. And actually, that wraps up all of the content that we're going over for class 4.